You can introduce yourself.
Okay, can you put your screen down just a little bit so I can see people?
Sure. Can you see them?
Okay, there we go.
Perfect. Okay, she could see. She could see some of you. If you want to see, she could see over there. Great. Thanks, Jasmine.
Yep. Okay, so we're good. I feel like I'm talking to somebody. You guys can hear me okay? Okay, great. So I know it's kind of late, so I appreciate you guys still hanging out and still being here. I want to be able to share my story, to give a little bit of insight into human trafficking, sex trafficking specifically, since it is Human Trafficking Awareness Month in January. And I thank Debbie for inviting me, and I wish I could have been there in person, but it's actually good I didn't come because I have a lot of snow. I'm in New Hampshire, and we have a ton of snow right now, so that wouldn't have worked. So I'm just grateful to be able to be here to share my story, to raise a bit of awareness, and then hopefully, if we have some time and this technology works for us, we can maybe have a conversation, or you can ask questions, or whatever is on your mind afterwards. So I wish I could talk to you guys more personally, because I don't know what everyone in the room's idea is about sex trafficking. I don't know how common you think it is, if you've heard of it before, you know, if it's something that you think doesn't happen where you are. But if anyone, maybe I can hear you. If you could just kind of let me know, who's in the room, like what your ideas of trafficking is, what are some ideas and thoughts that come to your mind when you think about trafficking. Anybody?
I have to say, go ahead, say it out loud.
I was just gonna say,
Oh.
Jeffrey Epstein's old house is like 3 blocks from where I live.
Okay, interesting. That is really cool. That is good to know. I mean, well, not cool, but you know what I mean. So that is good. I'm glad that the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing has brought more of attention to what sex trafficking looks like. But that can also distort it, right? Because then we think, oh, only rich and powerful people exploit girls, and it does happen to boys as well. And not just the rich and powerful are the problem. So it can happen to anybody. Trafficking, labor, or sex trafficking can happen to anybody, male or female. It just depends on how much at risk you are to becoming trafficked. And your average guy creates the demand for sex trafficking, unfortunately. Guys who are addicted to sex, guys who have sexual brokenness, pornography is kind of the gateway into becoming a buyer. They say that young boys as young as 7 and 8 years old today can become addicted to porn because of the tablets and the computers and the phones that they have in their hands. It's so much easier these days to find porn and then become addicted to it. It changes the brain just like a drug. And a lot of times, these young boys can become purchasers later on because of the porn that they're consuming early on in their life. Changes the brain. And being in regular relationships with women or young girls oftentimes doesn't look like porn. So it gets real distorted and relationships get messed up. And so that's why a lot of us in the anti-trafficking movement say that porn is kind of the gateway into becoming a purchaser. And also a lot of girls and women are trafficked through pornography as well. So back to talking about vulnerability and risk. For me, my vulnerabilities was just growing up in a home with a lot of dysfunction. My mom struggled severely with mental illness, and my dad worked a lot to provide for the family. So no one was ever really around to help me, to care for me, to nurture, to give me what I needed. And I was just kind of on my own from a young age. But I did have grandparents who were very kind and very loving. And I grew up in the North Shore of Massachusetts. If you can't already hear my accent, obviously, I'm from Boston. And I grew up in a big Italian Catholic family. And so I would sleep over my grandfather's house on the weekends, and my nanny would take me to church on Sunday. And Then we'd have Sunday dinner, and my papa would cook the gravy and meatballs. That's what we call it. And I just felt really loved and cared for there. And my grandmother would read me bedtime stories. She would tuck me in at night. And just planted those seeds of love and acceptance. But unfortunately, it wasn't enough to carry me through. And I just always felt like I was looking for love and validation and acceptance from the outside world. And I started drinking and drugging and partying real young. I was probably 12, 13 years old. And I did experience sexual violence as a teen. I was raped, unfortunately, twice by the time I was 14 years old. But I don't remember all the details because of the blackouts from the drinking and the drugging, which caused a lot of shame, a lot of, no self-worth. I had no identity. I didn't have anyone help me process that. And being a little girl and experiencing those things, and again, not having like safe people in my life to really talk to them about this, it just put me on a path. I was just really broken and knew I never wanted to become a prostitute. That's not something on my list. That's not something on any young girl's list. We don't dream of becoming drug addicts or prostitutes when we grow up. But unfortunately, things happen and put us on this path. And the vulnerabilities and the risks just get worse and worse. And before you know it, we're in a situation and we can't get out. So they say that 80 to 90% of women who are in the commercial sex trade as adults were sexually abused as children. So you think about that early childhood trauma and how that dial's already been turned and how, they're being abused at such a young age. And then a trafficker comes around when they're maybe 13, 14 years old. That's the average age into commercial sex trade, by the way, between 12 and 14. And this trafficker comes along and promises them what was so freely taken is now going to get paid for. This seems like an upgrade, right? And that early childhood abuse plays into that. Obviously, kids running away from foster care or the Department of Children and Families are a giant risk. Kids that have experienced domestic violence in their home or a parent in jail or drug addiction. The door, obviously just gets much more opened because of all these traumatic and vulnerable things that these young kids experience. So, being that young kid and having all these problems and not really having anyone help me process just led me down a broken path of continuing partying, hanging out with the wrong people. I did go to vocational high school, so I wanted to be a hairdresser. So I thought when I graduated at 18, I'll have a job. So I was able to work at a hair salon. I went to community college for journalism, so I wanted to be a writer. And I was just on my path. I actually thought, I could work at a fancy hair salon, write for a magazine, live in New York City, right? I had dreams and plans. But I was at a local nightclub, and this guy comes up to me, and he knows a few friends of mine, so he wasn't a complete stranger, and he offers to buy me a drink. And he, took me to the bar, and he spent maybe $7 on me. And I was impressed, okay, because that's all it took for a guy. Just over $7, and he was handsome, and he had lots of jewelry, and he had lots of cash, and he was dressed nice. And I was like, ooh, who's this guy? I'd never dated anyone like that, just out of high school. He was maybe a couple of years older than me. And a few days later, we get together, and he shows up in a champagne-colored Mercedes-Benz, right? And he's got everything that I was intrigued by. Now, obviously, there was plenty of red flags, right? He was probably a drug dealer, whatever. I didn't know he'd be my trafficker. I didn't know that would turn into that. But I ignored all those red flags. And also, that kind of lifestyle, dating a drug dealer or dating a guy with a lot of money and he doesn't come from a wealthy family is like glamorized, right? Especially in that hip-hop culture. Having all that money and selling drugs, and that's like all normal, and it's commercialized, and it's all good, and you don't think anything of it. So, to have a trafficking situation, you need a victim, a sex trafficker, and a buyer, right? And so I told you already how the buyers usually are produced and how they become buyers. And I told you about the vulnerabilities that make victims victims. And then, but how does a trafficker become a trafficker, right? A lot of times it's generational. If your dad or your uncle or your brothers are the pimp, you become a pimp. They kind of pass it down. A lot of them are drug dealers, or they sell guns and drugs on the streets, and they realize that selling women is a lot more profitable because you can sell one woman over and over again compared to having to sell drugs and keep buying more. And it's a lot less risky, right? You get pulled over on the highway with a trunk full of cocaine, you obviously go to jail right away. So if you get pulled over on the highway with a woman in the car, it's a lot less obvious. And for a lot of traumatic and for complicated reasons, she's not going to raise her hand and self-identify and tell the cop she's a victim, right? She's not going to say she's a prostitute. Those words just aren't going to come out of her mouth. And they also break you down. Traffickers break you down mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, as many ways as possible, because they're trying to break you down and beat that human spirit out of you, because they're trying to build you back up into a product, because that's all you're seen as. You're just seen as a moneymaker. So my trafficker worked really hard at grooming me, and so some of the ways he groomed me in particular were taking me out to dinner, taking me shopping, getting my hair and nails done, meeting my family, coming over for Christmas, Thanksgiving, really playing that boyfriend role, got me to love and trust him. And at the same time of going through this process, he would also sprinkle seeds of doubt in my mind. And he would say, why would you want to work at a hair salon? You can own one. Why would you want to go to school for journalism? That's stupid. I know a way you can make a lot of money. You can have a family, you can have a business, you can have anything you want. You're having sex anyways, you don't have to get paid for it. Right, and so that's the other thing about the commercial sex trade, whether it's high-price escorting, street prostitution, online stuff like OnlyFans, and so many of those websites and apps that are available today. It's sold as glamorizing, it's sold as empowering. And there's actually a lot of sex workers out there today who say this is their choice and this is great, and they're making tons of money, and it should be regulated and so forth. But you know what, at the end of the day, the commercial sex trade does nothing but enslave, and it does deep, deep soul damage. Nobody comes out of the commercial sex trade unscathed, whether you're a victim or a buyer. It's just impossible. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, you guys understand about sexual purity and so much of what God designed sex to be for, and it isn't to be bought and sold. That's just so wrong, and it does so much damage. But you don't think of these things, right? And I grew up watching Pretty Woman. I don't know, I can't see all you guys, but I'm sure you guys know what Pretty Woman is. Nowadays, too, that movie Taken, right? So it's a little more glamorized and over-sensualized about what trafficking is. But back in the day, Pretty Woman was just so empowering, and Julia Roberts was so, independent. And I'll tell you, my 8 years on the commercial sex trade, Richard Gere never showed up in a Lamborghini and put a string of pearls around my neck, right? It just doesn't happen. And it's just a lie. And for a long time, I bought that lie. My trafficker really did a good job at coercing me and manipulating me and getting in my mind. And I try to help people understand why I stayed with him for 5 years, how I got groomed and manipulated and trapped under there, was because it was like a cult, right? You're in mental and emotional bondage. It's in the mind. I wasn't necessarily handcuffed to a radiator like some victims are. That does happen. But for me, it was that mental and emotional bondage. And I also believed I was no good, dirty. No one would ever love me. No one would accept me. And that God definitely didn't accept me. And I was totally shameful. I was going, like hell in a handbasket, right? I felt completely unable to talk to God or to come before Him or anything like that, because I just felt so dirty and unaccepted. And my trafficker would just break me down again, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And it's almost like domestic violence on steroids, because he would use violence as a way to keep me under his control, right? And so he had a gun on him, he had a gun at the house, and when someone tells you that they're going to kill you or your family if you don't do what they say, you believe them, right? Because they have a gun, and why wouldn't they? He would threaten me all the time and so forth. So long story short, so we don't have a ton of time. I was under my trafficker for those 5 years. I worked at massage parlors. He sent me to work in Hartford, Connecticut for a little while. And the reason why I went there first was because it was hardcore. So you had to work from 10 a.m. to 1 a.m. a few days in a row because it was far from Boston. And the men who came in, didn't tip much. You had to do a lot of hustling. You had to try to do the least amount of work to make the most amount of money. And there was rules around what you could and what you couldn't do with the sex buyers. And it was just hard work. And it was dirty, musty. There was no windows. It was up in this big building right in the busy finance district of Hartford. People would walk by all day and have no idea what was going on behind closed doors. Lots of girls there that were underage, probably 14, 15, 16 years old, all the way up to 60-year-old women. And I worked there for a while. And after I started speaking up and saying I didn't want to do this anymore, I changed my mind. Because he isolated me. He pulled me away from all my regular friends, my hair salon job. I didn't go back to college. Before I knew it, I was living with him in a single-family home. all these things, he really isolated me. And when I started saying I didn't want to do this, that's when he really started to use the violence to keep me under his control. And so from also working in Connecticut, I went to another massage parlor in Kittery, Maine, which was a little more high priced, you could say. It was only 45 minutes from Boston, and I worked there 4 or 5 days a week, and the men that came in paid a little bit more. So you try to justify that, and you try to pretend okay, well, I'm making $300 an hour, this is okay. So there were moments of me being in that life that I tried to hold on to hope and try to justify what I was doing just so I wouldn't commit suicide. It was really, really hard. But finally, after those 5 years of being there, tried to escape so many times, never worked. He put me through college by the end to get an associate's degree in business because he wanted to have a business, a legit business to run all of his money through. He had so many other women working for him. Those were considered my wife-in-laws. There's so much different language in the way that world works. It's completely underground and happening in plain sight. Maybe 3 streets down in your neighborhood, but you have no idea, right? Because it's not as visible. And I went to college, community college, for 2 years, as a trafficking victim, and made the dean's list, did really well because I poured everything I could into that degree because I thought in my mind, well, you know what, I work really hard, he can't take away the degree. Maybe none of this other stuff's going to come true, but at least I'll have that degree when I'm finished. So I worked real hard to get that, saved up money, tried to escape from him so many times, but the last straw for me is unfortunately when I became pregnant. And that was with his child. Now, a lot of traffickers do impregnate their women on purpose to keep more control. And this was not his deal. Sadly, he forced me to terminate that pregnancy. And I was so horrified. And there was a time in Massachusetts where you couldn't get an abortion. And I was trying to hold on to that time. Because I thought, okay, if I just reach that, however many weeks or months it was, and I don't have the abortion, then I'll be able to have the baby and it'll be able to save my life, and I can retire, I can have everything that he promised me. It had been almost 5 years by this point. But sadly, that was not the deal, and he kept pressuring me, and I knew if I didn't do what he was telling me to do, I'd lose the baby in some other god-awful way, so I just did what I had to do. But that lit the fire inside me, and I was like, you know what? I gotta go. He used me and abused me all these years, and take a life was way more than I could handle. So I started saving money without him noticing, and I wanted to get my own apartment because every time I'd escape, I'd go to my parents' house, but he'd come there and badger me, manipulate me, cry, promise he'd never hit me again, and so forth, and I'd always return. But this time, I wanted to take my own place so I could just be far away and maybe wouldn't find me. But how does a woman stay in the commercial sex trade, I don't care if it's a year or 10 years, walk into a real estate agency and fill out an application? We can't, right? We have no job, no reference, lots of debt in our name, probably children to take care of, mental health issues, substance abuse issues. The link between substance abuse and trafficking, prostitution is so close. Criminal records this thick, felony charges, right? The door just gets that further away on purpose because the commercial sex trade, or they say prostitution is the world's oldest profession, but really it's the world's oldest oppression, right? Against women and children especially. And so I was determined, and don't you know, by God's good grace in my life, no, my relationship with the Lord, like I told you, was non-existent, but I would cry out to a God who did not understand for help. Desperate times, cry out for help, Lord, please save me, please help me. And he was working in my life. Obviously, I'm still alive to this day for a reason. I didn't recognize it then. But I met a man off of Craigslist because I worked in those massage parlors for a time. One of them ended up getting busted, and this is when the internet became popular. So my job, I posted ads of me on Craigslist and so forth. And I went to this gentleman's house, nothing happened, but he paid me a lot of money just to sit there and talk. And then week after week, he would continue to call me back, and I'd go there, and nothing would happen, but we'd watch TV and hang out and laugh. And he became my safe person. So research says that when a woman's ready to leave the commercial sex trade, she just needs one safe, supportive person to reach out to because she's so isolated. Obviously, I didn't know that at the time. I just knew this guy wasn't touching me and that things were okay. And guess what? He owned his own business. And so when I was ready to reach out to him, I asked him, hey, send an email, my name isn't whatever, it's Jasmine, I'm in a lot of trouble. You don't know my situation, but can you lie and say that I work for you? I need to get my own apartment and I need to have a real job. So he said, sure, you made me the fake pay stubs, and I was able to get my own apartment. Like, that's wild. Like, how does that happen besides God? Like, working in your life, trying to, really help you out. And so I was able to get the place. My trafficker wasn't going to let me leave. He was going to, help me pack and let me take everything I basically purchased. No. I had called the police, and I said, my boyfriend's going to get mad. Can you come hang out on the porch? So that's exactly what the cop did. He just stood there, and I left with nothing, right? With 2 trash bags. My cat and my dog. And I got into one of the cars that was in my name anyway, and I drove away to my new place. Cop didn't follow me, he didn't offer me any, even domestic violence resources, nothing. So I walk into the apartment. I'm hopeless, I'm suicidal, I'm full of trauma, I have no idea how to put my life together. I call my mom, right? I don't have the courage to tell her everything that I've gone through, but for what it's worth, my parents weren't really there for me as a child, emotionally and mentally, but physically they always showed up. I always had a roof over my head, my dad always provided, and whenever I needed something, my mom would help me. And so she came to my place, she helped me buy some furniture, she helped me put it together, she didn't ask any questions, she was just glad that I was okay. And a few weeks would go by, and what would I do? I called him back, right? Because of Stockholm Syndrome, because of those trauma bonds. I had no idea how to do life without him, and I also knew that if there's rules to this game, in this life, I, was to go out and prosecute on my own, and I get caught, I'd be considered a renegade, and I could possibly get killed, or I'd have to choose another trafficker, and he'd pay for me. And I didn't know how much worse violent he was going to be than that guy. So I just tried to stick with what I know, and I live here, and he'll live there, and I'll give him a cut of the money. But unfortunately, a few more weeks go by, and that didn't work out. And one night, after a lot of violence and blood and a big fight between us, I had the courage to call 911, which I never would have done in the past, but I was just so determined to move on. And so he was arrested that night for domestic violence, which then kept him away because I got a restraining order. And a lot of guys don't care about that piece of paper, but this just kept him away, probably because he had so much other money and other girls and doing things that he didn't want to be bothered. So I tried to get a job, 9 to 5, as secretary. I'm falling asleep at the desk. You can't just plot me on that life and put me in normal society. It totally wasn't going to work, but I was trying. And I couldn't pay my bills at the end of the month. I was completely overwhelmed. Again, completely traumatized and suicidal. And I started hanging out with new friends, and they were all getting high. And this is when OxyContin was real popular. So unfortunately, I started dibbling and dabbling. Before I knew it, I had a full-blown addiction to OxyContin, which pushed me back into life of prostitution. Not with a pimp, but with a growing drug habit. And then some time would go on and unravel. My life would go right down the tubes. Addicted to heroin, sleeping on park benches, homeless, losing everything. More trauma, more abuse, just unhealthy relationships, all types of horrific things. And always knew that I never belonged where I was, where I had ended up as a junkie, prostitute on the street. That's not where I was supposed to be. But I didn't know how to get back to home, wherever that was. And until my brother died, unfortunately, in 2006, I didn't share his story in the beginning. He was 10 years older than me, and sadly, he was abused sexually by a family member when he was around 7 or 8 years old, and never could recover from that. And he went on his whole life to, on the outside, he lived a really amazing, glamorous, fun life. He traveled and backpacked through the world. He lived in Sydney, Australia, or London. He made it to back to the States in San Francisco, and then ended up in New York, in Chelsea, and lived there for a while. Who he actually connected with a partner who was addicted to crystal meth, and he was really into the whole gay lifestyle and a lot of partying, and contracted HIV. And at 36, he overdosed on some, I think it was GHB and some party drugs, and just didn't wake up the next day. I think his body was tired. And it was just such a sad story and interesting how we both lived almost very parallel lives. And that really woke me up, right? Because when he passed, I was like, wow, if I die, I'm gonna leave my parents with no kids, and how sad is that? Like, we both end up doing the same thing. And I was determined not to have that be my final outcome. It took me a long time to get clean and sober, and you don't go into treatment once and get it. For me, I didn't anyway. It took me a lot of attempts, but finally in September of 2007, I went into my last treatment center, got clean and sober and off the streets. So I think this year, I don't know, 14 or 15 years, whatever, I can't do the math at the moment, but it's been a long time since I've been in that life and on drugs. And I did not know I was a survivor of trafficking for the first 5 years of my recovery. I just had to, put my life together without the drugs and figure out how to, pay my rent on time and like get a normal job and so forth. But I'll tell you right now, it was my Christian faith that really saved me. I ended up being brought to a non-denominational Christian church in my area by a woman that really loved me and didn't judge me and brought me to Christ. I gave my life to Christ actually, and he saved me, right? He met me in that muck and mire, that shame. I felt so disgusting, but God met me right where I was and loved me, and I haven't looked back since. And so today here I am doing this anti-trafficking work since probably 2012. I'm married, I have 5 kids, we're a blended family, I'm a homeschooler. Not because of COVID, I started homeschooling before that, accidentally, and it's probably the hardest thing ever, but it's the best thing. I drive a minivan, like I live in New Hampshire, how did all this happen? It's wild. And I have this small organization called Jasmine Grace Outreach, and I have 2 employees and about 5 survivors who are on the team who we've walked alongside for the past 5 years, who didn't know they were survivors at first, right? And so that's part of our outreach mission. So we do a lot of public speaking to raise awareness. We do mentorship. We go into halfway homes and programs for women that have addiction to help them realize that they could be survivors too. And once we start talking about that and help them walk alongside them and help them heal from that type of trauma, they exit and they don't keep going into the cycle of prostitution and addiction and homelessness, because someone gets it and we've been there. And we want to help support them, get them into safe houses across the country if necessary. And then also we have this other arm called Bags of Hope. And Bags of Hope is where we give out over 1,000 bags a year of toiletries, soap, shampoo, conditioner, toothpaste to women on the streets and jail and these programs. And the cool thing about Bags of Hope is that it's all filled by the community. So we have churches and Bible studies and high schools and doctor's office, all types of places donating by doing donation drives and filling the bags, and then we give them out to the women in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. So I've been doing this work, like I said, for a while. I've written a book in the meantime, and I don't have any fancy slides or anything to show you, but if you want to take note or write it down, my website is jasminegrace.org. And the name of my book is The Diary of Jasmine Grace, Trafficked, Recovered, and Redeemed. You can find it on Amazon. It's pretty amazing that I was able to put this book together because it's all based on my old journals from when I was trafficked. I managed to keep journals and write down the things that I was going through. Not really the horrific things, but more, again, that mental and emotional stuff that really I struggled with. And I was able to compile that into the book and put some present-day reflections in there as well to let people understand really the mind and how we stay trapped and how we recover. And again, my Christian faith plays a giant role in my recovery. I have no idea how I would do this without the Lord's grace, mercy on my life. So I'm really grateful for your time. I kind of gave you a speedy version of my story just because I want to be mindful that it is late. But if you guys have any questions or thoughts or comments, please let me know. But thank you so, so much.
Thanks, Jasmine. That was amazing. We do have one copy of your book out in the lobby, so if anybody wants to look at it before they order it or if they want to borrow it, So we can do Q&A now. If you can, if anybody wants to be on screen, you can come over here. Like if you want Jasmine to see you, otherwise she can hear you. I was curious, I'm looking at so that she can see me. What about the men, the male half of this? Do they also have to articulate rehabilitation, or does your organization, have anything to help them recover as well? I don't know. Did you hear that, Jasmine?
Can you translate, Debbie? I can't.
Sure.
Within and out.
And I'll give the mic from now on. So, is there anything that helps the men who are trapped in these addictions? I mean, obviously, like pornography, sexual addictions. In the trafficking world, are there any organizations, I guess you're saying, that help men? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yes, there are. And forgive me, because I only know of one that's local to me in New Hampshire. It's called the Nathan's Project, and it's a for only men's group. So it's these men that go and connect and get the sexual accountability in that kind of group setting. I'm trying to think of the national help, and it's not crossing my mind at the moment. There's some books written about it. I think if you were to Google or look on even Facebook for men's accountability or how men can help in the anti-trafficking movement, you might find some ways. There's some men that volunteer to get together. It's called A Bunch of Guys, and they're out of Seattle, but it's also national now, where these guys get together and they try to curb the demand by posting ads on the adult websites. When the sex buyers call to make an appointment, they think they're calling for a girl because they place, women's ads on these websites. And so the sex buyer will call, and these men pick up the phone and try to deter them and try to educate them and let them know statistics and the reasons why it's not okay to buy sex and some support and resources. So that's, I think, pretty cool. My mind is just really blank right now, but there have been in the past few years more men stepping up to the plate and being part of this solution, for sure.
Awesome, Jasmine. Thank you. That sounds amazing.
Hi.
What are the signs, if you see someone, or if you walk by the same area in a sketchy neighborhood, or what are the signs to look for if we think something's going on? We should call the police, or if we know someone briefly that may have suspicion, or what do you think are warning signs that we could see to trust?
Okay, what are the signs? I think the microphone makes it worse. So, because I can hear you when you talk about it. So what are the signs I heard, and then I didn't hear the rest?
Okay. So if you suspect that trafficking is happening, and you see people on the street or whatever, what are your suggestions, I guess, as far as trying to help? I know there's a hotline, right, that you could...
Or what are the signs to look for?
Oh, what are the signs to look for on the street?
Yeah, the signs to look for on the street. And that, don't walk up to girls on the street if you're with a guy. Okay, that's number one. That's really dangerous. But the signs to look for on the street, obviously the drug addictions, the chronic homelessness, those are all really risky red flags. Having multiple cell phones or a lot of cash, I don't know if I just said that or not. Looking disheveled, having a backpack stuffed with everything they own in one bag. Bus stations, train stations, Penn Station all day long. They go Chinatown, Flushing, New York, in the Queens. That's a giant area for trafficking. You're going to see a lot of Asian massage parlors, big time. And they go from New York to Massachusetts, around New England, back and forth. The issue with the international trafficking victims is that they don't speak English. And it's really hard to connect with them, and they're very afraid. And all their passports and money and everything's been taken. And they're in complete fear, and there's also a lot of shame surrounding that, because if their family finds out back home what's happened to them when they thought they were coming here to get a better life in America, and that doesn't happen, a lot of shame. And that's really hard. And I know in Massachusetts, a lot of Asian massage parlors, and I know they go from here to Flushing very often, Chinatown, big time. But if you're a social worker, if you work in a hospital setting, if you're a teacher, and if you're seeing this girl maybe more than once, and maybe she always has a controlling person with her, or it doesn't always have to be a man. Traffickers don't always have to be men, right? And victims don't always have to be women. Of course, the LGBTQ community is very more at risk, right? And the trans youth and how they get trafficked because they're kicked out of their homes and they have no place to go. And oh my gosh, there are just so many signals and signs in different populations who are at risk. But really getting to know someone as much as possible, building relationship, because you can't save them, right? If you see a situation that would be unsafe to get into on the street, you can call your local law enforcement. I'm sure that they're all trained in human trafficking by this point. And if you've had an opportunity to build a relationship with someone, that's the best way, just to plant seeds of hope along the way. Ask questions without being too invasive, but, also to the point. I know it's situational, and just kind of offering some hope in non-judgmental way, and lots of mercy and compassion as well. I hope that's helpful. It's so hard. I know now that you hear about these things and you want to save people, you want to help them, but it's not always that easy. It's not always black and white.
Thank you. If I could just ask something about the massage parlors. I mean, I read something about the legalities of these and how they became legal, but I don't know if you can comment on that. Like, are any of them really legit? Like, I really feel like if we have this huge human trafficking problem, like, wouldn't it be like, something that we should make illegal now? Or what's your opinion?
Yeah, I definitely think it should be, but I don't know how the loopholes, I don't know how they get through, but it's clearly, if you're spotting these massage parlors in your community and then you Google their phone number and it also pops up on an adult website and they're offering hot Asian girls, it's clearly not just a massage place. Not every massage parlor is doing things illegally, but a lot of them aren't. And a lot of the Asian ones are for sure. The problem is you can put in a tip all day long to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. The Polaris Project hosts the National Human Trafficking Hotline Center. You can put in tips there all day long. You can call your local police. And if they get enough tips and they do a bust on the place, the problem is when the Homeland Security or the FBI go in, they try to help the women by offering them services, not arresting them because they're realizing they are potentially victims. Offering them services, their women decline and they say no because they're so afraid. It's really rare that they come out. You do have a program in New York called Restore NYC, who is specific for Asian women that are coming out of these situations. If they do, which again is rare, but so these people will get arrested or whatever, they'll be put on bail, but then unfortunately they just pop up somewhere else. It's so hard. I don't know. I don't have an answer, but that's just how it goes.
Thank you. Any other questions? I had a question. I can't really get out, but I was just gonna ask because I don't really know a whole lot about this topic, but maybe in the city of New York, how big is this problem? Like in the numbers, how many cases of it would you say are taking place right now? Just kind of to give us the concept of it. I know it's really hard to know these kinds of things, but I was just curious. Could you hear Jasmine?
I couldn't hear it.
I'm so sorry. Okay, so you want to? Could you give us a snapshot of New York City of the numbers or just how prevalent human trafficking is here?
I don't have the numbers, but it's very prevalent. And go on to the Human Trafficking Hotline Polaris Project's website. You can even visit Shared Hope's website, and they grade each state by their legislation, their laws regarding trafficking. So I don't know what New York's grade is, But you go on Shared Hope and find lots of resources. You go on the Polaris Project, and you can see the map, and you can see how heavily red it is on the East Coast compared to the flyover states, which is it's there. I mean, it's happening, but it's not as populated. It's not as hardcore as the two coasts. It's extremely a big problem.
Yeah, if you could speak.
All right.
If you sit, you should probably see you.
Okay.
Hi, thank you for sharing your story. I have a relative, a young relative, and she is in the porn industry, and she calls herself a sex worker. You know, she's out front, very proud of herself, and she's making money. But somebody like that, because I believe what you say, it's soul killing, no matter what. On the outside, she's the image that she's putting forth. But what about somebody like that who isn't at least showing the struggle that you obviously went through? How do you reach somebody like that? Is it possible?
Tell me again, in the beginning, you have a relative and you're asking me how to reach someone like that. Tell me what the someone like that is again, so I can understand.
She's in the porn industry and she's making money and she feels successful and she calls herself a sex worker and everything's great and this is who I am. It's a whole different side of it. To me, that's what I see. But.
Okay. So she's saying that she's still empowered and this is great and this is what she's choosing to do. Right. That's tough, right? Because again, it's in her mind, and I don't know what got her into that situation, but I have lots of questions. I would share resources with her. There are plenty of survivor books that have been written. I'm thinking of one on the top of my head specifically for industry girls who come out of strip clubs or porn. Check out this website on this woman named Harmony Grillo, and the name of her book is Scars to Stilettos, or Stilettos to Scars, but right, Harmony Grillo. And the name of her ministry is called Treasures. And she has some really, really great resources for those type of women. And I don't know, somehow a way you could have a conversation with her, take her out for coffee. I don't know what your relationship is with her, but just try to pour into her, and love her, but give her resources and say, again, I don't know your relationship what it is, but if there's ever a time that you don't want to do this anymore, there is a way out. There is help. There are women who are just like you, who've been through things that don't do this anymore, and they see a different side. And no one comes out of, again, the commercial sex trade unscathed. And so I know there are some days you're probably really hurting inside. And there's probably a lot of trauma and a lot of pain there, but be safe and be supportive and try to be non-judgmental and pray, right? Pray that the Lord gives you opportunity to minister and offer some resources.
Thank you.
It's so hard.
Thank you. Right. Great.
That was kind of my question. What does she think about this movement now growing about making prostitution legal and calling it sex work and decriminalizing it?
Your thoughts on the whole legal movement now to make prostitution legal as sex work? We might even have a discussion on this with the Public Policy Office in the next couple of months. But yeah, if you could give us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, my gosh, there was a big push throughout all of New England, including New York, obviously. Vermont, I believe they already passed it. Obviously, I'm one of those survivors on that side of the fence that don't think prostitution should ever be legal. There's the Nordic model, if anyone has ever looked into different ways that they can help prostitution not be criminalized, right? Because you don't want to go after the women, the victims necessarily. You don't want to arrest them. That's not making sense, because then you're just making it harder for them to exit. But going after, again, the buyers and the traffickers. Perfect example of the Epstein thing. What about all those men that have purchased over the years? Where are they? They need to be held accountable. And that just hasn't happened for far too long. But in order to do the Nordic model, to offer the women services and not jail time, you need the exit grants, you need the programs, you need the advocacy, and that's what is a real lack of. There's a lack of safe housing and rehabilitation programs for the victims, especially for males. There's only one male stay home in the States. Never mind the underage victims. There's no help for underage male victims. And where most of these men end up? Jail. Right? Because they become violent, and they end up in prison. And again, the women just end up out on the streets, cycling, addiction, prostitution, so forth. I just know sex should not be called work at the end of the day. And so I'm completely against it. And there are some women in the sex trade who call themselves sex workers. Again, and they say they're empowered. And I think about the times that I was in the commercial sex trade, and in my mind, I thought I was empowered too, because I was making $1,000 a day driving a Mercedes-Benz. But at the end of the day, I was crying myself to sleep. So, you buy the lie, and it's in the mind, and they realize it's just terrible. And they try to normalize it and make prostitution like normal, pedophilia normal. It's just so sad.
To me, that would only, again, empower those who are exploiting women. But anyway, the Nordic, where do they get that name Nordic from? I did start listening to Shared Hope and their podcasts and stuff, and they talked about this, but I was wondering where that name originated.
I want to say Switzerland or Sweden.
Okay. So they
one of those countries have done it, and it's very it has worked really well.
Okay, great. So and they saw the numbers maybe coming down even for prostitution. Okay, great. Wow.
Big time, and they curb demand because now the men are being held accountable.
Well, that statistic that you mentioned, about 80% of these women have been sexually abused as children. I mean, that's something really, I think that, if someone's in this field, talking to them about early trauma like that, I mean, it just gets buried, I think, and maybe the behavior that results from it, they don't, they're just trying to justify without actually healing from those traumas that they went through. Does anybody else have any questions? Almost done. One more. This will be the last question.
Hi, how are you?
can
This is a little different. You mentioned before about your brother and you being in parallel worlds. Did he have any idea what was going on with you all this time or know anything?
Good question. He did not know about my life because I was very secretive of my life. Like 5 years that I was with my trafficker, I did visit my brother when he lived in San Francisco and then New York, and he was very open with his life. It was clear, and I didn't know if he ever got, had a trafficker. That's how he got into prostitution, male prostitution. I don't know how he got in, but by the time I was visiting him in California and New York, he was very open and very clear. Like, this is what he did, it was just part of his lifestyle. But for me, he didn't really know the details. But again, there were many red flags. Like, so he definitely put the pieces together that I was young in my 20s and I was flying out to California and New York to visit him. And I had breast implants and I was, probably a size 0 and I had lots of money and I drove around in a Mercedes, so we've never talked about it, but I'm sure he thought I was a dancer, that this guy was a drug dealer or whatever, but never got into conversation about it specifically because I was just too ashamed and kept it much of a secret for sure.
Thank you so much. I know you have 5 little children that are chomping at the bit, so we just want to thank you so much for joining us and doing this. And I just highly recommend her book, The Diary of Jasmine Grace, because I think it gives you really such a great understanding of the emotional impact and really what it takes to get out, right? It's not a simple thing. And also just the power of God in your life. So we're just so grateful. And really, if there's anything we can ever do, and when this COVID thing is over, we would love to have you in person and even to the high schools, if anybody has any groups that they would like Jasmine to speak at. But those bags of hope too, I know you have your contact information in those, right? You offer resources that women can actually take with them and to try to get out. So you reach a lot of people through that. So we're just so happy to have you with us, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. And really, Deb, thanks for everything. Even the technological challenges. It's so funny how things try to, thwart our plans, but we did it.
Yes.
So thank you for all that. And thank everyone. It's so late. I love them. Thank you.
God bless you. Bye bye.
Can I stop the hotspot, please?